the Senior Associate Justice and the Associate Justices of the Supreme Court of the Philippines. Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. All persons having business before the Honorable Supreme Court of the Philippines shall give their attention, for the court is now in session. Of the Supreme Court of the Philippines. Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye.
Will the clerk of court please call the case?
GR number 225973, Saturnino C. Ocampo et al. Versus Rear Admiral Ernesto C. Enriquez in his capacity as the Deputy Chief of Staff for Reservist and Retiree Affairs, Armed Forces of the Philippines et al. Rene A.V. Sagisag Sr. et al. Intervenors. GR number 225984, Representative Edsel C. Lagman in his personal and official capacity and as honorary chairperson of the families of victims of involuntary disappearance et al. Versus Executive Secretary Salvador C. Mejaldea et al. GR number 226097, Loretta Ann Pargas Rosales et al. Versus Executive Secretary Salvador Mejaldea et al. GR number 226116, Heherson T. Alvarez et al. Versus Honorable Salvador C. Mejaldea in his capacity as Executive Secretary et al. GR number 226117, Syra Patricia B. Banyaga et al. Versus Secretary of National Defense Delphine N. Lorenzana et al. And GR number 226120, Algamar A. Latif versus Secretary Delphine Lorenzana in his capacity as Secretary of National Defense et al. Same appearances for petitioners and respondents, Your Honor.
Thank you. We resume with the respondents. Turn to argue. The Solicitor General will have 25 minutes, followed by the counsel for the Marcoses with 5 minutes, and after that we will have the interpellations. So, Mr. Solicitor General, you may take the podium now.
Honorable Chief Justice and Associate Justice, at this moment in our history, I recall a scene from Julius Caesar where Mark Antony spoke to his countrymen, "I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is oft interred in their bones." Inspired by these lines, I now come to your honors to allow the state to bury the remains of former President Ferdinand Marcos at the libingan ng mga bayani, not to honor him as a hero, even if by military standards he is, but to accord him the simple mortuary rites befitting a former president, commander-in-chief, war veteran, and soldier. This solemn duty now falls upon the shoulders of President Rodrigo Roa Duterte, who is tasked to implement the guidelines governing the libingan. As the father of this nation, President Duterte desires to begin the long overdue healing of our nation and to exorcise the ghost of enmity and bitterness that prevent us from moving forward. Unfortunately, the wisdom and propriety of President Duterte's well-meaning desire to put a closure to this divisive issue has pinched the nerves of some who cannot forget their travails during the martial law era. In just a few days, 8 petitions were filed seeking to overturn the orders of the President. I beg that your honors should not be swayed by the epithets and ad hominem arguments of petitioners. Neither should you allow the momentum for national reconciliation and unity to be stalled. Time constraints prevent me from discussing all the issues in the advisory. However, let me just point out that our procedural defenses are sufficient enough to throw out the petitions. These are briefly the violation of the elementary principles of hierarchy of courts and exhaustion of administrative remedies and the lack of locus standi to invoke judicial review. Based on these alone, the petitions must be dismissed. Let me now proceed, Your Honors, to the meat of the matter. In this oral defense, the state will concentrate on 4 essential points. First, the wisdom of interring Marcos at the libingan is a political question. Well settled is the rule that the mere existence of a controversy will not authorize the exercise by the courts of its power of review. An issue submitted before this honorable court must be susceptible of judicial determination. Hence, excluded from judicial review are the questions of policy and wisdom, otherwise referred to as political questions. Mamba versus Lara. The term political questions connotes a question of policy. It is concerned with issues dependent upon the wisdom, not legality, of a particular measure. Bellica versus Executive Secretary. We respectfully submit that the instant controversy is beyond the ambit of judicial review, as it involves an intrusion into the executive wisdom behind the interment of Marcos at the libingan. As stated earlier, the underlying policy of President Duterte in ordering the interment of Marcos at the libingan is to promote national healing. The same policy was manifested when he declared a unilateral ceasefire with the CPP, NPA, NDF, and when he implored this honorable court and the lower courts to grant temporary liberty to NDF consultants for purposes of peace negotiations in Oslo, Norway. We give credit to the judiciary for its harmonious cooperation with the presidency in propelling the peace talks by allowing the NDF consultants to post bail. Interestingly, petitioner Ocampo was one of the beneficiaries. President Duterte's decision to inter the remains of Marcos at the libingan should be dovetailed to his war against corruption and dangerous drugs and his recent dealings with the CPP, NPA, and NDF. All these are geared towards real change by attuning the heart of this nation to the harmonics of peace, reconciliation, and unity. The House of Representatives of the 15th Congress shared the same sentiments when 218 of its members adopted House Resolution number 1135, urging former President Benigno Aquino III to allow the burial of the remains of Marcos at the libingan. Our congressman chorused that such a burial will be, quote, a magnanimous act of reconciliation which will strengthen the bonds of solidarity among the Filipino people, unquote. They also added that the libingan is, quote, the most fitting place of burial for a former soldier, statesman, and former president and commander-in-chief. Even petitioner Congressman Teddy Bagilat agreed that Marcos should be buried at the libingan because he co-authored the resolution. This brings us to this point. Where does a president derive his authority to direct the interment of the remains of deceased presidents at the libingan? We submit that it comes from at least 3 sources. 1, administrative code, which gives him the power to reserve lands of public domain for public use. 2, 1987 Constitution, which gives him the power of control over the executive departments, bureaus, and offices. Specifically, the PVAO of Philippine Veterans Affairs Office. And this is also echoed in Section 38, Chapter 37, Book 4 of the Administrative Code. And 3, residual powers of the presidency. President Duterte's directive to inter the remains of Marcos at the Libingan falls under his residual powers under the Constitution, which powers are implicit and correlative to the paramount duty residing in that office to safeguard and protect general welfare. Marcos versus Manglapus. The case of San Lakas versus Executive Secretary further cements the residual power of the President in our jurisprudence when this honorable court ruled, and I quote, "The powers of the Presidency are not limited to what are expressly enumerated in the article on the Executive Department and in scattered provisions of the Constitution. This is so, notwithstanding the avowed intent of the members of the Constitutional Commission of 1986 to limit the powers of the President. Thus, whatever power inherent in government that is neither legislative nor judicial has to be executive. The power to inter the remains of Marcos at the Libingan clearly belongs to the executive. Notably, former presidents exercised the same residual power when they decided the fate of Marcos's remains during their respective terms. President Corazon Aquino flexed her residual power when she barred the return of the remains of Marcos to the Philippines from Hawaii. President Ramos used his residual power when he overturned President Cory and allowed the return of said remains, subject to certain conditions. President Estrada expressed his intention to allow the burial of Marcos at the Libingan so that the decade-long turmoil over the issue will subside, unquote. And President Pinoy opted to ignore House Resolution number 1135, which is also an exercise of his residual power. If the prerogatives of these former presidents were respected by this honorable court, so must it be with President Duterte. It is indubitable that the act of President Duterte is a political question, hence non-justiciable. The next question is, did he gravely abuse his discretion to warrant this honorable court's exercise of its power of judicial review under the Constitution? The answer is no. Petitioners cannot rightfully ascribe grave abuse on the President because his directive is firmly and legally grounded on the standards laid down in Presidential Decree 1076 as amended by the Administrative Code. In addition, this directive is consistent with AFP Regulations G 161-375 dated September 11, 2000. Grave abuse of discretion has consistently been defined as, quote, the arbitrary and despotic exercise of power due to the passion, prejudice, or personal hostility. In layman's language, the gravity of the abuse of discretion must nearly approximate the whims and caprices of an emperor like Caligula and the hostility of a despot like Pol Pot. The qualifications and disqualifications laid down under AFP Regulations 161-375 are so crystal clear that the President only exercises minimal discretion in deciding who may be buried thereat. As such, the room is too little for the President to abuse said discretion. This leads me to my second point. Marcos is qualified to be interred at the Libingan. Under AFP Regulations 161-375, Marcos is qualified. Why? Specifically, he was a Medal of Valor awardee, a former President and Commander-in-Chief, a war veteran, and a statesman. Judicial notice can be taken that Marcos was President of the Philippines from December 30, 1965 to February 25, 1986. As President, Marcos served also as the Commander-in-Chief. Likewise, prior to becoming President and Commander-in-Chief, Marcos served as a member of Philippine Congress from 1949 to 1959. He was also a member of the Senate and serving as Senate President during his last 3 years therein. Marcos is also a recognized military and war veteran, not mentioned an awardee of Medal of Valor through General Orders Number 167, dated October 16, 1968. The pertinent records to prove all of these are attached as Annexes 8 to 11 and 13 of our consolidated comment. In fact, since April 9, 1994, the Philippine Veterans Office has been giving private respondent Imelda Marcos a monthly pension of 5,000 a month as the surviving spouse of a deceased veteran pursuant to RA number 6948 as amended by RA number 7696. In addition, Imelda Marcos also receives a monthly pension of 20,000 from the AFP as a surviving spouse of a Medal of Valor awardee. Marcos suffers no impediment to be interred at the Libingan under the subject regulation. He was neither dishonorably discharged from the service nor convicted by final judgment of an offense involving moral turpitude. The argument that his ouster in the 1986 EDSA revolution is tantamount to a dishonorable discharge from military service finds no support in the AFP regulations. A military officer can be dishonorably discharged only through court-martial proceedings for violating articles of war while he is in active duty. At the time of his ouster, Marcos has long been a civilian. The Lagman, Rosales, and Sagisag petitions state that the agreement between the government represented by former Secretary Rafael Alunan III and the heirs of Marcos represented by Imelda Marcos bars the latter from burying the remains of President Marcos at the Libingan. They claim that it was a binding contract that must be honored by the state. However, the Memorandum of Understanding provides that the remains shall be temporarily interred at Batac, Ilocos Norte, provided that any transfer of burial grounds shall be with the prior clearance of the Philippine government, taking into account the prevailing socio-political climate. President Duterte is not bound by its terms because, as the sitting president, he has the prerogative to determine and adopt executive policies in line with the changing times. Congress recognizes this executive privilege as evinced by its adoption of House Resolution number 1135. Why would Congress urge President Benigno Aquino to inter the remains of Marcos at the Libingan if he was already hog-tied by the alleged FBR agreement? If Congress thought that it was not bound by the alleged FBR agreement, why should President Duterte be? Third point, Republic Act number 289 is a defunct law. I repeat, a defunct law that cannot modify the clear language of AFP Regulations 161-375. True, RA 289 authorizes the construction of a national pantheon as the burial place of the mortal remains of all presidents, national heroes, and patriots. The building, called the National Pantheon, was supposed to be erected at East Avenue, Quezon City, pursuant to Proclamation number 431, issued by President Quirino on December 23, 1953. However, efforts on the part of President Quirino to erect the National Pantheon failed to materialize. The National Pantheon never existed. In fact, after the initial seed money of 1 million pesos, the Congress from 1949 up to the present did not bother to appropriate a single cent for the full implementation of RA 289. That is 67 years, Your Honors, of abandonment. Moreover, worthy of note is that on July 5, 1954, then-President Magsaysay issued Proclamation 42, revoking the previous issuances of President Quirino that reserve a parcel of land for the National Pantheon. By virtue of Proclamation number 42, the land which was originally reserved for the National Pantheon was re-allotted for a national park to be known, and as it is now known, as the Quezon Memorial Park. Without doubt, the inaction on the part of Congress and the withdrawal of the reservation of the land for the Pantheon by President Magsaysay are clear expressions of the legislative and executive will to abandon RA number 289 altogether. As Justice Velasco correctly said, RA number 289 is a dead law. Consequently, the so-called standards of inspiration and emulation perished with the demise of RA number 289. These so-called standards were meant to be observed only for those interred in the National Pantheon. They cannot be applied to other laws creating the libingan ng mga bayani, specifically PD 1076 and Executive Order 292. Nothing ought to be read in the law which is not clearly intended by its clear wordings, Tavora versus Gabina. Furthermore, the libingan is not a national pantheon referred to in RA 289. As such, RA 289 and AFP Regulations 161-375 are separate and distinct from each other. The libingan traced its origin not from RA 289, but from General Order Number 104, dated October 3, 1902, issued by U.S. Secretary of War Elihu Root, as will be explained later during the interpellation. In contrast, AFP Regulations 161-375, not to mention the previous issuances governing the libingan, is currently implemented and backed up with necessary appropriations from Congress. Presently, the libingan is located at Fort Bonifacio in Taguig City, a parcel of land of the public domain which used to be a military reservation site and later transformed into a national shrine for military memorials. Finally, my fourth point. The interment of Marcos at the libingan is not violative of the international laws and norms because the state has already enacted and made available all required legislations and judicial remedies. The petitioners adopted four flawed premises in their arguments. First, the first flaw, libingan ng bayani is reserved for heroes. The second flaw, Marcos was not and can never be considered a hero. Third flaw, the burial of Marcos at the libingan has the effect of redeeming his image to make him a hero. And fourth, the image of Marcos as a hero will defeat the spirit of the 1987 Constitution. From these flawed premises, they then concluded that this alleged modification of history will violate the Philippines' obligations under international law and norms. Their syllogistic premises are logically false, and hence, the conclusions derived therefrom are not only non sequitur, but also incorrect. First, as discussed above, the history of and the applicable guidelines pertaining to the libingan will show that its name is a misnomer. I repeat, misnomer. There is no standard or a body defining what a hero is. Petitioners cannot insist that the libingan is for heroes only. In reality, the libingan, which is located in a military reservation, is a military cemetery with some civilians buried in it. The interment of the remains of Marcos does not and will not confer upon him the title of a hero worthy of emulation. Despite its name, the long history of the libingan tells us that its purpose has neither been to confer to the people buried thereat with the title of hero, nor to require that only those buried therein should be treated as heroes. As a matter of fact, the records will show that even 3 Chief Justices, widows of AFP Chiefs of Staff and national artists, are interred at the libingan. It is absurd that these persons were allowed to be interred at the libingan and yet a former president would be disqualified. Second, the interment of Marcos at the libingan is not an attempt to rewrite history as the petitioners paints it to be. To me, and this is my personal opinion, history is best written in the hearts of men rather than in recycled papers. President Duterte's decision to bury Marcos at the libingan is a mere acknowledgement that he is a former president and commander-in-chief, war veteran, and a Medal of Valor awardee, and nothing more. Third, as exhaustively discussed in our consolidated comment, the state has already complied with the pertinent international laws and norms through the enactment and availability of legislations and judicial remedies, including but not limited to the following: RA number 9851, RA number 10353, RA number 9745, RA number 9201, RA number 10368, and the rules regarding writ of habeas corpus and writ of amparo. With these, the state has shown to the world that it is determined to protect and preserve the essential human rights embodied in the International Convention on the Civil Political Rights, as well as the UN Principles of Reparation and UN Principles of Immunity. The 1987 Constitution itself contains provisions that ensure and promote and protect human rights through the creation of an independent commission on human rights. Lastly, petitioners fail to establish the imperative for this honorable court to issue an injunctive writ. Petitioners do not have a clear legal right to prevent the interment of Marcos. What the petitioners experienced during martial law does not necessarily give them a right in esse that would warrant the issuance of an injunctive writ in this case. On the contrary, it is the state that will suffer irreparable injury if an injunctive writ is issued, because it will unduly curtail the current administration's momentum in fostering unity, healing, and reconciliation among Filipinos, regardless of tribe, ideology, and political persuasion. The interment of the remains of Marcos at the libingan is one of the campaign promises of President Duterte in his agenda of change. He said it when he was a candidate, and he is saying it now as president. This is on top of his war against corruption and dangerous drugs and the peace negotiations with the CPP, NPA, and DF. They form the facets of the psyche transformation of this country. The sovereign people responded by giving President Duterte a landslide vote of 16,601,997 that catapulted the mayor from Davao City to the president of this nation. The vox populi is too deafening to be ignored. The 14,155,344 votes that Bongbong Marcos garnered in the last election shows that there is no more national trauma as regards the martial law regime. The people elected President Duterte to be their agent of change. Thus, this honorable court must heed the clarion call and give President Duterte enough latitude in the exercise of his political discretion. Let me close, Your Honors, with a quote from The Merchant of Venice, where Portia begged Shylock not to exact a pound of flesh from his debtor. And I quote, "The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes. 'Tis mightiest in the mightiest," unquote. The Bible says that all men have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Since the Lord Since our Lord Jesus freely forgave our sins on the cross, we should also have the humility to forgive those who sinned against us. God bless the Philippines. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. May we call the counsel for the Marcoses to take the podium. You have 5 minutes.
Good day, Your Honors. May it please the Court. Standing before this honorable court today, I am humbled, but also steadfast, as I remember the oath I took when I first became a lawyer, binding me to obey the law. At the outset, I would like to manifest that despite the sentiments surrounding today's proceedings, our purpose as lawyers is still to uphold the law. The issue, therefore, at the core of the instant proceedings is not whether the late President Marcos should be considered a hero by every Filipino. That issue belongs to the heart of every citizen and is not for the lawyers to decide. The issue is not whether the late President Marcos plundered the country's coffers. Cases have already been filed and continue to be pending on those matters. The issue is not whether the petitioners are victims of human rights abuses during the Marcos administration. Claimants, if they can so prove, have their own remedies under other statutes and venues. The legal issue is simply this. In ordering the interment of the late President Marcos at the libingan ng mga bayani, did President Duterte, who is, might I add, also a lawyer, did he commit grave abuse of discretion by doing what is, in his own words, obedience to the law? We respectfully submit that he did not. We must bear in mind that the petitions, whether for certiorari or prohibition, were filed under the Rule 65 of the Rules of Court. The fundamental requirement, therefore, for the issuance of these great writs is grave abuse of discretion amounting to lack or excess of jurisdiction. Grave abuse of discretion specifically means capricious or whimsical exercise of judgment. There is grave abuse of discretion when power is exercised in an arbitrary and despotic manner by reason of passion and hostility. The assailed order of President Duterte is in accordance with express provisions of law, whether as invoked by petitioners, Republic Act No. 289 establishing the National Pantheon, or AFP Regulation G161375 governing the libingan ng mga bayani, which, as public respondents submit, was established under Executive Order No. 77 and Proclamation No. 86. Both clearly state that presidents of the Philippines may be interred at the National Pantheon and the libingan ng mga bayani. Republic Act No. 289 is emphatic. It states in no less than 3 instances that all presidents, I repeat, all presidents of the Philippines be interred at the National Pantheon. In the same vein, AFP Regulation G161375 categorically prescribes that presidents of the Philippines and retired and active military personnel of the AFP be allocated burial plots at the libingan ng mga bayani. The resolution, therefore, of the issue at bar hinges on simple matters of fact. Did President Marcos serve as President of the Philippines? Did he serve in the armed forces? Petitioners do not deny that the late President Marcos was a President of the Philippines. In fact, they cannot deny this, for he is the only President to have been re-elected and have served 2 full terms. Petitioners do not contest that President Marcos was a soldier who fought in the Second World War. By these undisputed facts, and by the clear provisions of law, President Marcos is indisputably qualified to be buried at the libingan ng mga bayani. Consequently, the order of President Duterte, which merely implements the unambiguous words of the law, cannot possibly be capricious or whimsical, nor arbitrary and despotic. It could not, by any measure, be considered grave abuse of discretion. On the contrary, the order is not only in accordance with law, but in fact implements the law. Your Honors, the law is clear, the law is plain. President Duterte merely applied the same. As the repository of executive power of government, tasked with enforcing the law, President Duterte could do no less. Should the positive provisions of law be disregarded in favor of the sentiments, the clamor, the popular noise of certain groups, then this honorable court would be abetting a slide to the very anarchy it has vowed to fight. Thank you, Your Honors, for the opportunity to speak in this hallowed chamber. With this, we rest our case.
Thank you, Counsel. We will begin with the interpellations. Justice Kagiwa.
Can I ask the Solicitor General? Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Your Honor.
You gave the court a PowerPoint presentation that detailed the different laws that govern the libingan ng bayani.
Yes, Your Honor.
And in your speech now, you make a distinction between that and the national pantheon.
Yes, Your Honor.
I just want to clarify some background matters on the libingan.
Yes, Your
Alright?
Honor. May I be allowed for my to activate the PowerPoint presentation,
course.
Your Honor? Your Honor, I don't have a monitor that I can see, so...
It's okay. My questions here are very simple.
Yes, Your Honor.
Can I continue?
Excuse me, Your Honor.
Just points of
Thank you, Your
clarification. Let me begin with Proclamation number 86, which you had mentioned in your PowerPoint, which renamed the Republic Memorial Cemetery to the Libingan ng mga Bayani. And the reason given is because the name Republic Memorial Cemetery was not symbolic of the cause for which our soldiers had died and did not truly express the nation's esteem and reverence for her war dead. That is correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Let me turn to Proclamation number 208, declaring the Libingan ng mga Bayani as a national shrine under the administration of the then National Shrines Commission. Correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, under PD number 1076, the National Shrines Commission was abolished and its functions pertaining to military memorials were transferred to the Military Shrine Service of the PIVAO, or the Philippine Veterans Affairs Office. Correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
PD 1076 tasks the PIVAO to, among others, and I quote, administer, maintain, and develop military memorials and battle monuments proclaimed as national shrines. Correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, under Section 1, second paragraph of the PIVAO RAT Plan, or Rationalization Plan, dated June 29, 2010, the MSS, or the Military Shrine Service, was renamed Veterans Memorial and Historical Division, whose primary functions, according to the RAT Plan, enumerated in Section 2, pertained to, and I quote, administration, maintenance, and development of national shrines consisting of military memorials or battle monuments. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
So it is the Veterans Memorial and Historical Division that currently administers the libingan?
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, under the same PIVAO-RAT plan, the functions of the National Shrines Commission were transferred to the National Historic Institute. Is that correct?
I don't have the papers with me, but I would assume it is.
Okay. And the National Historic Institute has been renamed by Republic Act 10086 to the present-day National Historical Commission of the Philippines, or NHCP. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Now, given these presidential proclamations and decrees concerning the libingan, we can properly classify the libingan as a military shrine or a military memorial declared as a national shrine. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. In other words, do you agree that the libingan is not a normal cemetery for the interment of the war dead, but rather serves as an expression of the country's esteem and reverence for the cause that our soldiers died?
As I mentioned in my opening speech, Your Honor, in reality now, the libingan is a military cemetery with certain individuals interred thereat. I mentioned in particular, three Chief Justices of the Supreme Court, the Chief of Staffs, their widows, national artists, even Senator Arturo Tolentino, who was the Vice President of Ferdinand Marcos when he was ousted in 1986, is interred at the libingan ng mga bayani.
Nevertheless, the proclamation in Proclamation number 86, that is where we will inter our dead as the nation's esteem and reverence, continues. Is that correct?
Well, yes, Your Honor, I will agree. But, however, there are the AFP regulations also allow other classes, specifically civilian people, whose remains will be interred at the said libingan.
Understood. Now, this brings me to PD 105, the same PD that I mentioned in the last oral arguments. Can you confirm that PD 105 is still a valid and subsisting law?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. And the subject of PD 105 are national shrines, correct?
Yes, Your Honor. In fact, the PD 105 enumerates what are these national shrines.
Among others. It uses the word among others.
Yes, Your Honor. For instance, the national shrines where these are the sites of the birth, exile, imprisonment, detention, or death of great and eminent leaders of this nation.
All right. Now, I call your attention to the third whereas clause, and there is specifically or expressly stated a policy of the state to hold and keep said national shrines as sacred and hallowed places, correct?
Yes, it is there, Your Honor.
I've done my own research on some definitions of sacred and hallowed places, and I found the following. Sacred is defined as regarded with great respect and reverence, worthy of or regarded with reverence, awe, or respect, secured against violation, infringement, among others, as by reverence or sense of right. Hallowed, on the other hand, means venerated, respected and admired, and considered very special and treated with great respect. Do you agree with these definitions?
Well, I have no quarrel with that, Your Honor.
All right. These words of esteem and reverence in Proclamation 86 and the words sacred and hallowed in PD 105, will you agree with me that these are not empty or meaningless words?
Well, they are not, Your Honor.
In fact, they express some standard to be followed as regards the libingan ng mga bayani. Is that correct?
I may agree on certain points of that, Your Honor, subject to my explanation that as in reality now, the libingan ng mga bayani does not inter only bayanis or heroes.
Yes. Let me rephrase my question. Since it is admitted that the Libingan is a national shrine, the policy of the government must be to hold Libingan as a sacred and hallowed place, correct?
Well, with all due respect, Your Honor, it is my submission that PD 105 does not apply to the libingan, Your Honor.
Because?
First of all, Your Honor, if we read the PD 105, it talks about national shrines which should be located in the sites of birth, death, exile, imprisonment, detention, or death of great and eminent leaders. Certainly, not one of those interred there was born in Fort Bonifacio, exiled in Fort Bonifacio, imprisoned in Fort Bonifacio, detained in Fort Bonifacio, or died in Fort Bonifacio, Your Honor.
So it is your submission that even as the proclamations declare the Libingan as a national shrine, the PD nonetheless does not apply to it.
Yes, Your Honor.
Is that your submission?
Yes, Your Honor.
I'd like to tie that up with the AFP burial regulations. Am I correct to believe that the reason for the enumeration in the burial regulations as to who are not qualified to be interred is aligned with the standards of sacred and hallowed place or the status of Libingan as a national shrine?
Well, subject to what I've stated, Your Honor, I may agree partly with that, Your Honor.
Let me again rephrase my question. Personnel who are or who were dishonorably separated, reverted, discharged from service, they do not deserve the esteem and reverence, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
In the same manner, personnel who were convicted by final judgment of an offense involving moral turpitude also do not deserve esteem and reverence, correct?
They ought not be buried at the Libingan.
Okay. If these disqualified personnel I had just mentioned, those not deserving of esteem and reverence, were to be buried in the Libingan, then do you agree with me that the classification of Libingan as a national shrine will be tarnished?
Not necessarily, Your Honor.
Why so?
Because, as I said, there is nobody that defines what the meaning of hero is. And therefore, the assumption that only heroes must be buried at the
No,
Libingan
that's not my
is a
assumption.
fallacy, Your Honor.
My assumption is that the people who are disqualified from being interred there are people that we cannot hold in esteem and reverence. That is my assumption.
I am willing to concede that they should not be allowed to be interred there because of that AFP disqualification rule, Your Honor.
Okay. All right. Let me jump to another question.
Yes, Your Honor.
In your consolidated comment, you stated that there is no law requiring the President to bury the remains of Marcos in the Libingan. That despite the absence of such law, the President has opted to do so because it is an exercise of his own judgment
Yes, Your Honor.
or wisdom in order to begin the healing process.
Yes, Your Honor.
In the exercise of this judgment, did he consider Proclamation number 208, which reserved the Libingan as a national shrine?
Yes, Your Honor. In fact, 3 presidents are already buried in the Libingan, Your Honor.
Did the President also consider Proclamation number 86, the proclamation that sets the standards for esteem and reverence?
Yes, Your Honor, subject to the overall assessment of all factors, Your Honor.
Did it take into consideration this decision? Did it also take into consideration the state policy expressed in PD 105 as regards national shrines?
Well, all of that were considered, Your Honor. But as I said, in actuality and reality, there are civilians who are interred there, like former presidents, former vice president, senators, national artists, even 3 chief justices, Your Honor.
This is my question, Solicitor General. In light of executive, legislative, and judicial pronouncements that characterize President Marcos as a dictator, plunderer, human rights violator, can you explain how his burial in the Libingan can further the policy to hold and keep Libingan sacred and hallowed, or with people to be esteemed?
With all due respect, Your Honor, those epithets were tagged on Marcos when he was a president and not as a military officer, Your Honor.
So you make a distinction for his acts as a military officer and his acts as a civilian president. Is that the distinction you're drawing?
Yes, we can distinguish those two, Your Honor,
Okay.
because it is also undeniable that former President Marcos was a military officer, he was a war veteran, and he's a soldier, and he was honorably discharged from service, Your Honor.
I would imagine that the President also considered Republic Act 10368 and the nation's obligations under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights when he exercised this discretion, correct?
That is my presumption, Your Honor.
My question is very direct. Will not the burial of President Marcos in the Libingan have a negative effect on the nation's obligations to afford human rights victims full and effective reparation?
My direct answer, Your Honor, is no.
The Commissioner of Human Rights had spoken in the last oral arguments and emphasized that reparation is not merely giving money for the suffering and pain that had been endured by the victims, but also to recognize what had transpired and to ensure that it will not happen again, and to do everything that a state can do in order not to re-traumatize the victims. Don't you think that the act of burying President Marcos will, as the testimonies of the victims declared in the last oral argument, will they not in fact cause them to be re-traumatized?
Well, the word re-traumatized, Your Honor, does not apply in the particular law that you have cited. In fact, I was surprised that the human rights victims who were present here last Wednesday were allowed to narrate their horrible experiences during the martial law regime. That is, in fact, re-traumatization, Your Honor. They should not be allowed to relive their past, Your Honor, the horrors of their past in a proceeding like this, Your Honor. There is a place for that, but not before the Supreme Court.
They came here, filed 8 petitions, and in all those petitions and even in the oral arguments, what is clear to me, at least personally, is the pain and anguish that they were again undergoing in having to file this petition and in having to passionately argue against the burial of President Marcos.
Well, Your Honor, we have sufficient laws for that matter to deal with their predicaments.
So you do not think that burying President Marcos will diminish their rights of reparation under this law?
Definitely no, Your Honor. In fact, even our Honorable Ombudsman said that it will not even affect the pending cases before the Ombudsman, and even the Human Rights Victims Compensation Board chairman also said there will be no effect.
As far as the reparation of financial money is concerned.
Among others, yes, Your Honor.
Before the President gave his verbal order to have the remains of President Marcos interred in the Libingan, did the heirs of Marcos make a personal request to that effect?
In fact, Your Honor, that was a campaign promise even before he was a president.
And that was a promise given to whom?
To the heirs of President Marcos, Your Honor.
Was this a unilateral act on the part of the President, or was this a request from the Marcos family?
I do not know the circumstances in which this promise was made, Your Honor. But if I know President Duterte, he already had a plan for the Philippines, a plan to unite all the Filipinos of different persuasions, ideologies. In fact, his policy of reconciliation is now manifested in the recent Oslo-Norway talks, Your Honor. He wants an inclusive government, Your Honor.
So what are we saying here? That the testimonials made by the human rights victims and the other people like them, which the claims board has numbered at around 75,000, those pain that they feel, they do not reflect the national psyche today. Is that what we're saying?
Your Honor, I am a human being. I feel their pain. But we are in a court of law, Your Honor. And there are venues where that pain will be expressed by the victims. And as far as I know, making them recount their horrible experience is a form of re-traumatization.
From what I understand from their testimonies and the summation made by the human rights, what is re-traumatizing them is the act of burying President Marcos. Do you dispute that?
I do not agree with that, Your Honor.
When the President made his decision to allow the interment of President Marcos in the Libingan, did he also consider the injury that the Marcos family would suffer if the burial did not take place?
I believe so, Your Honor.
Did he also consider the injury that the human rights victims suffered and they say will continue to suffer by this decision?
Your Honor, please, I trust the wisdom of our President. And if that is what his decision is, we support his decision, Your Honor.
The remains of Mr. Marcos have been in Batac, Ilocos Norte for more than 20 years. Can you tell us what the urgency is for him to be interred right away?
Well, the urgency, Your Honor, is that President Duterte has already stated that among his policies, Your Honor, is the policy of reconciliation, national healing, and any day that is, shall I rephrase it, Your Honor? This is the policy that he has adopted. The remains of Marcos should now be interred at the Libingan. Even the 218 congressmen, Your Honor, of the 15th Congress agreed that this place is the most fitting place where former President Marcos will be buried, Your Honor.
And this wisdom, this decision is over and above the pain and sufferings of the human rights victims. Do I understand that correctly? As a political decision that he made.
Well, the President will take every matter into consideration, Your Honor. And I assume he considered that too.
All right. Thank you. Can I
Thank you, Your Honor.
ask the lawyer for the family?
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning. The OSG, as you heard, stated that the decision to inter President Marcos is meant to heal. Do you, as counsel for the Marcos family, agree with that premise?
Your Honor, if I may, the purpose of the burial, whether it is for healing or not, is not relevant in the instant proceedings for certiorari and prohibition.
No, is it
So-
relevant to the family of Marcos?
Your Honor, unfortunately, when I discuss the case with my clients, I only discuss the merits of the case with them and not their emotions.
You were in the oral arguments last week, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
And you were witness to the testimonials given by the human rights victims, correct?
Yes, I was here, Your
And
Honor.
when you met with your clients, did you or did you not convey to them the emotions, the very raw emotions that were expressed by the human rights victims? Emotions that are 40 years or 30 years after all of these incidents. Did you convey to them?
Your
Yeah.
Honor, I have not had the opportunity to meet with my clients since then, but also I would like to manifest that, unfortunately, the victims who gave their testimonies last Wednesday were not able to give those testimonies at the proper forum where they could have been subjected to the proper requirements of due process, and also for the late president to have been given the same rights. So, Your Honor, unfortunately, those testimonies should not have a bearing in a court of law.
Do you believe that the heirs of Marcos have a right under law to have the remains of President Marcos interred in the libingan?
Well, Your Honor, the laws authorize his burial, so they may invoke that as a demandable right.
And what laws are we referring to? For you, the heirs of the heirs of President Marcos.
Your Honor, both Republic Act Number 289 and AFP Regulations 161375.
So you don't agree with the Solicitor General that Republic Act 289 is a defunct law? You in fact say it's still a live law?
Your Honor, our submission is that in applying either law, the burial of the late president would still be legal.
Sorry, what's the other law that you mentioned aside from RA 289?
It is AFP regulation,
But that is just a regulation, that is not law.
but it has the force and effect of law within the armed forces, Your Honor.
Within the armed forces.
Yes, Your Honor.
If I remember my civil code correctly, obligations arise only from 5 sources: law, quasi-delict, delict, contract, and quasi-contract. The AFP regulations may have the force of law, but it isn't law. Agree?
Well, Your Honor, it has the force and effect of law, so it should be a source of right. And in fact, I submit that it was enacted in accordance with the ordinance powers of the President
Okay.
under the Administrative Code, Your Honor.
So you're maintaining that this is a demandable right, enforceable by a court of law.
Yes, Your Honor.
So my question is, why is it that in the last so many years, the family has not seen fit to file a case to compel the government to allow Mr. Marcos to be buried at the libingan?
Your Honor, I can only speculate, but although they have not filed any case during the past 20 years, they have been asserting his right as they have not actually interred him, but he has been lying in state for more than 20 years, waiting to be able to claim that right.
Rights can prescribe, can they not?
Yes, Your Honor, but if it is being asserted continuously, then there would be no prescription.
But the assertion, the continuous assertion, I think refers to a court action, correct? To interrupt the period of prescription.
Well, Your Honor, in this case, I believe there's also the matter of the contract between the government and the Marcoses, which provided for the possibility of transfer of the burial place. I believe they also found that binding, but since the government now is allowing the transfer of the burial place, then this is the proper time for them to assert that right.
But the contract was dated in 1993, if I'm not mistaken.
In 1992, Your Honor.
And actions arising from a written contract prescribed in 10 years, correct?
Yes, Your Honor, but this is not, I am merely saying that that must have prevented them from asserting the right earlier. But now that the government is giving them the opportunity to exercise that right, they are now claiming it.
So are you saying that the family of President Marcos did not request during the campaign that if Mr. Duterte became president, that they be allowed to inter Mr. Marcos in the Libigan? They did not make such a request?
I'm not aware if any request has been made, Your Honor.
So as far as you're concerned, Counsel, this is all a unilateral, voluntary act on the part of the government. Is that it?
As I said, Your Honor, I'm not aware if it is unilateral or bilateral.
Okay. Are you aware of the agreement right now between your clients and the government as to the particulars of the intended burial?
Your Honor, I'm aware that there is a memorandum and a directive, and that is, I believe, what governs the arrangements for the burial.
Is there an agreement to what kind of honors will be accorded Mr. Marcos?
Your Honor, in the memorandum of Rear Admiral Enriquez, I believe the honors which may be given may be inferred from the military personnel who are requested to attend the burial or to participate in the burial.
Did your clients ask for any special kind of military honors to be accorded Mr. Marcos?
I am not aware if such request has been made, Your Honor, but if I may point out, in fact, military honors have already been accorded to the late President Marcos in 1992.
Are you aware if the family is asking for military honors in excess or above those military honors that had already been accorded?
I am not aware, Your Honor.
Do you know who will bear the expenses of the transportation of the body from Ilocos to the Libingan?
I believe it will be borne by the Marcos family, Your Honor.
So it will not be sourced from the AFP funds?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. In the earlier interpellation of the Solicitor General, I go back again to the question of the exercise of discretion, the exercise of wisdom, which is to heal, no? And in that course of questioning, I brought up the fact that, in fact, it was the Solicitor General who brought up the fact that in response to this plan to inter the remains of Mr. Marcos, no less than 8 petitions were filed. 8 petitions by 8 different groups of people who were all victims under martial law. I'm wondering if the purpose of all this is to change the psyche of the Filipino towards healing. Is it possible for the Marcos family to actually withdraw their petition in the face of all that pain and anguish that was expressed in the last hearing as a sign of healing?
I will have to bring that up with my client, Your Honor.
And once you do, can you file a manifestation with this court to tell us exactly how they react to that?
Yes, Your Honor, I will file manifestation with a clear reservation that the issue of healing and the reactions are not relevant to the instant proceedings.
Can you tell me what injuries the Marcos family is suffering because President Marcos is not being interred in the Libingan? Is there any injury?
Your Honor, with all due respect, the issue here is the propriety of the decision of President Duterte to inter him. The injuries which the Marcos family may be suffering would be, to discuss this would be amounting to an academic discussion, Your Honor.
Not necessarily. We are a court of law and a court of equity. And as judges, we are mandated to find a solution to any legal controversy, prescinding from the emotions.
Yes, Your
That is the
Honor.
basis of my question.
I agree, Your Honor, but equity must follow the law. And in this case, the laws applicable do not consider the injuries on the family of the deceased.
So do I take it that you will not answer my question?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. I have no more questions.
Justice Leonen.
May, may I may I ask you to remain, if possible?
Yes, Your Honor.
You mentioned the lawyer's oath.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, and that means that you said that an important part of it is that you are sworn to uphold the law. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
But not only the law, but also the Constitution. Is that not correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
In fact, you also swore not to do any falsehood in court.
Yes, Your
correct?
Honor.
Okay. Of course, I needn't have said that. All of us know that whoever appears at that podium must follow the lawyer's oath. Is that not correct?
Of course, Your Honor.
Yes. Okay. Now, is the Constitution law?
Yes, Your Honor. The
In
fundamental law.
The fundamental law. Thank you
Yes,
for clarifying. And every provision in the Constitution is also part of the law of the land.
Yes, Your Honor.
So it is not only Republic Act 289, which is part of the Constitution, but also the Constitution itself, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Is Republic Act 10368 law,
Yes, Your Honor.
also part of the law of the land?
Yes, Your Honor.
Is Republic Act 9745, I think mentioned by the Solicitor General, which is the law prohibiting torture and providing for compensation and rehabilitation, also part of the law?
Yes, Your Honor.
So it is not accurate to say that it is legal, the burial is legal only because of 289. Is that not correct? Well, to be more precise, you said 289 and the AFP regulations, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
So it is not precise to say that all law consists of only Republic Act 289 and the AFP regulations.
Well, these are not the only
All
laws.
law does not consist only of Republic Act 289 and the AFP regulations. Is that correct or wrong?
That is correct, Your
Okay,
Honor.
so therefore, there are other laws which must be taken into consideration. Is that not correct?
For this particular case, Your Honor,
There must be other laws that this court can take into consideration. Is that not correct? Because it was pleaded by the petitioners. Is that not correct?
that is correct, Your
Thank
Honor.
you.
But if I may.
Now, please just respond to my question. You forgot, Attorney Hyacinth, that, well, in the classroom, you remember, only answer the questions that are asked so that it's clear. We are clarifying our minds here in order to be able to come out with the resolution. Please.
I
Okay, thank you.
apologize, Your Honor.
How many presidents have we had?
I'm sorry, Your Honor. I will have to refresh my memory.
President Rodrigo Roa Duterte
Is the
is
26th, Your Honor.
Really?
I'm sorry.
I am
The
missing 10
16th,
other
Your Honor.
presidents.
The 16th,
Yes,
Your
the
Honor.
16th president of this republic. Of course, he can be the 17th if we look at our history and say that Bonifacio was the first president, but that is not yet in our history books. Is that not correct?
Yes, Your
Yes,
Honor.
okay. So the first president was Emilio Aguinaldo. Is that not correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes. How many of the presidents have died?
Well, the only presidents alive are President Ramos, President Estrada, and President Araullo.
Oh my God, you killed
I'm
President
sorry,
Aquino?
and President Aquino, Your
Yes,
Honor.
okay. So
So,
I didn't know that, well, I know he's still alive, but
Yes, Your
unless you
Honor.
have different information. But now we're clear that there are now 11 of our presidents that have died.
yes, Your Honor.
Yes. How many are interred in the libingan ng mga bayani?
3, Your Honor.
And these 3 are Elpidio Quirino, Carlos Garcia, Diosdado Macapagal. Is that not correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
When President Garcia and President Macapagal were buried, was Republic Act 10368 already valid?
Your Honor, I believe when President Quirino was buried,
Was already valid.
it was already
Yes.
valid.
And when President Macapagal was reinterred at the libingan ng mga bayani, his remains was transferred. Is that correct? In
Yes,
2016, yes. Was Republic Act 10368 already valid?
Yes, Your
Are
Honor.
there any allegations that they have committed any human rights violations?
I'm not aware, Your Honor.
Is there any law that acknowledges that they have committed human rights violations?
There are no laws acknowledging, Your Honor.
Is there any case in the annals of our jurisprudence acknowledging what they have done as a earth-shaking historical event that caused the downfall of an entire government?
There are no cases, Your Honor. If I may, Your Honor.
On the other hand, is February 25, 1986 acknowledged as an official holiday by this country?
Yes, it is, Your Honor.
In fact, is there a Republic Act acknowledging the death of Benigno Aquino?
Yes, Your Honor, there is.
Okay.
But if
Now,
I may, Your Honor,
we are asking questions and your time for presentation had already expired, Counsel, and I think it is better so that I can save my time so that the other justices can ask their questions, that we focus only on the questions that are asked by each justice.
it is in
Thank
response to your question,
Now,
Your Honor.
The nomenclature libingan ng mga bayani, okay, was given by law?
Yes, it was, Your Honor.
Really, what law?
Your Honor, I believe it was
What statute?
Proclamation number 86, Your
Proclamation
Honor.
number 86, is it a statute?
Yes, Your Honor.
Proclamation is a statute.
It has the effect of law since it is,
I am asking, is there a statute which grants that place
it is
in the
not a
fort?
statute, Your
Not a
Honor, that is
statute.
enacted by Congress.
Yes. So what official issuance names that area as libingan ng mga bayani?
There is no legislative act renaming it,
What
Your Honor.
official issuance renames the Republic Memorial Cemetery to the libingan ng mga bayani?
Proclamation number 86,
Who
Your
issues
Honor.
that proclamation?
The President, Your
Who can
Honor.
withdraw that proclamation?
Yes, Your Honor.
Who can withdraw that proclamation?
The President, Your Honor.
The President, when he allowed the internment of Ferdinand Marcos, did he rename that place from libingan ng mga bayani to some other name?
He did not, Your Honor.
He did not.
He did not.
The intention, therefore, was to put the remains of Marcos in the libingan ng mga bayani. Is that not correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
So that's a fact.
Yes, Your
He
Honor.
could have removed the name libingan ng mga bayani, made the name of that place libingan ng mga bayani at dating pangulo at mga asawa ng mga pangulo at asawa ng mga DND, whatever, right? It was his option.
Yes, Your Honor.
That was an executive prerogative, correct?
Yes, Your
And
Honor.
we can take judicial notice of that prerogative. Isn't that correct?
Yes, Your
Yet
Honor.
he did not change the name from libingan ng mga bayani to some other name. Is that not correct?
He did not, Your
Okay.
Honor.
The definition of bayani, is it found in that proclamation?
No, Your Honor.
So it is left open. Is that not correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
And therefore, all the signals from the word bayani can be taken by the public and can be taken by all government officials simply by the ordinary acceptation of what bayani means. Is that not correct?
Your Honor, the
Is there not in
acceptations-
law a canon which says, when the word is clear, no interpretation is necessary?
Yes, Your Honor. there
Bayani
is.
means hero, correct?
Yes,
Translated,
Your Honor.
libingan ng mga bayani is the cemetery for heroes or resting place for heroes. I don't know what the exact translation of libingan is. I am an Ilocano, and therefore I would assume that it is cemetery for heroes. I guess there is a better translation in English, correct?
That is correct,
So a
Your Honor.
hero is a hero, correct?
That is correct,
Yes.
Your Honor.
Now, let's go to 10368. Are Marcos victims? Heroes. I'm sorry. Are victims of martial law during the Marcos regime, to be more precise, according to the law, are they considered as heroes? Section 2.
The victims of human rights violations
Are there
are
any
heroes.
of those victims
under-
interred in libingan ng mga bayani?
I am not aware, Your Honor, if
There
they
are
are.
3 chief justices that are there in the libingan ng mga bayani, correct?
Yes, Your
According
Honor.
to the Solicitor General. Yes, you
Yes,
agree?
Your Honor.
Yes. Have they committed also any human rights violation?
They have not
They have
committed,
not.
Your Honor, but I am not sure.
So by accepting the privilege to be buried at the libingan, the heirs must have known that the entire work, the entire body of the record of the former president will be made public. Is that not correct?
Well, I believe, Your Honor, all the...
And because it is bayani and now put as a legal question, what bayani actually means, then there needs to be some judicial scrutiny of the word itself and who can read the word. Is that not correct?
Your Honor, I believe the nature of the cemetery, as defined by law, is all that should be considered.
Yes, but you just said that there is no law. There is a proclamation, an official issuance,
As to
and
the
there are
naming-
laws like Republic Act 10368 and the Constitution.
As to
Okay,
the
let's
naming,
review,
Your
Attorney
Honor.
Hyacinth. What is the hierarchy of law? Which is on top?
The Constitution, Your
Which
Honor.
is below the Constitution?
The statutes,
The
Your Honor.
statute, correct? And after the statutes,
The rules and regulations which
okay.
may have the
What
force and
about
effect
the
of law.
International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights? What is this?
It is a treaty, Your
A treaty.
Honor.
And with respect to our constitutional order, what is it?
Your Honor, treaties, if they are established as customary international law,
No,
are
I'm sorry.
incorporated.
This is a treaty which was ratified, correct?
Yes, Your
So
Honor.
it is not Article 2 that applies, but Article 7, correct?
Yes, Your
To be more
Honor.
precise, Article 7, Section 22, correct?
As having been ratified by Senate, Your Honor.
Maybe not ratified, concurred in by the Senate,
Yes, Your
correct?
Honor.
Because
Yes, Your Honor.
ratification has a different connotation in law. Is that not correct?
Yes, Your
So
Honor.
therefore, it is part of the law of the land.
Yes, Your Honor.
Between an AFP regulation and a treaty, which do we follow? Which has a greater presence? In other words, if an AFP regulation, when applied, is contrary to a statute or a treaty, should it still govern?
Your Honor, I believe the first step is for the harmonization, and if there is no conflict
No, my
between the
question
two,
is, if there is a conflict, so I believe that that is the premise for my question. I know what you're trying to do, but I'm asking a question here, just to be sure that we are on the same page.
Your Honor, if
There
there
is a conflict
Your
between
Honor.
can you allow me to finish?
I'm sorry,
Counsel?
Your Honor.
If there is a conflict between the AFP regulation and the statute or a treaty, which shall govern?
Well, the statute and the treaty will govern over administrative issuance, Your
Is
Honor.
Republic Act 10368 a statute?
It is a statute, Your
Is
Honor.
the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights have the effect of a statute?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes. Is the Constitution, does it trump everything? If there is a conflict.
The
Yes.
Constitution will prevail,
And
Your
the
Honor.
AFP regulations, by the way, is this an issuance of the President of the Republic or is it an issuance of the Chief of Staff?
Your Honor, it is an issuance of the President through his political agents, Your Honor.
Again, was it issued by the President himself as an executive order or a proclamation, or was it issued by the Chief of Staff?
The actual issuance, Your Honor, was made by the
To be
Chief
more
of Staff.
precise, within administrative law, if there is an executive order or a proclamation by the office of the President, and there is a contrary department circular or AFP regulation, which one will govern?
The issuance of the President, Your Honor.
And the issuance of the President in this case is what?
As to the burial, Your
Yes,
Honor,
what is the issuance of the President relating to that place called the Libingan ng mga Bayani?
it is Proclamation number 86, Your Honor.
Yes, and in that proclamation, does it designate an authority to define what Bayani means?
No, Your Honor.
None. So the AFP regulations was simply issued by the Chief of Staff. Is that not correct?
Yes, Your Honor, as an
Okay.
agent of the President.
Now, you said you agree with you agree, of course, with the Solicitor General with the political goal of healing. Is that not correct? Political goal.
Well, I cannot speak about the goals of the President, Your Honor. I'm only representing the heirs.
The heirs do not agree with the President that this is for healing?
Your Honor, as to the effect to them, of course, it will be healing. But as to the motivations, political motivations,
So your clients agree that the burial of the remains of the former president will cause the healing of our nation.
yes, Your Honor.
Okay, and healing, of course, acknowledges that there is some form of reconciliation. Is that not correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
And reconciliation, therefore, means that there is a principal acknowledgement of what you are reconciling about. Is that not correct?
If I may.
Can you answer the question, please?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, so there needs to be an acknowledgement of what had happened before there is any reconciliation, correct?
Yes, Your
Yes.
Honor.
Otherwise, it is not a legitimate goal because there is no acknowledgement. Is that not correct?
If we are speaking hypothetically, yes, Your Honor.
But the question, of course, is whether all of this is within the political discretion of the President or whether this is a requirement under the law. Is that not correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes. All persons have human dignity. Is that not correct?
That is correct, Your Honor.
And just to be sure, this includes a person who dies who needs to be memorialized. Is that not correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Does the right to be memorialized, remembered by people, is it a basic human right? The right to be remembered as a person, the right to be remembered for certain aspects of your life, is it a human right?
Well, there are persons who die who are not remembered,
You
Your
are
Honor.
counsel
and-
for the heirs of Marcos?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, and you are asserting their rights in this forum. Is that not correct?
I'm asserting the propriety of the act allowing
Yes,
the burial.
so that means their rights. Is that not correct?
Yes, Your
Because
Honor.
you are not the Solicitor General, so the propriety of the acts of the President is for the Solicitor General to argue. Is that not correct? And I'm sure that the Solicitor General can stand on his own, and later on, I think some questions will be fielded to him. Is that not correct?
Yes, Your
Yes.
Honor.
Now, for the heirs of Marcos, do you think that the right to be remembered is a human right?
It is a right, Your Honor.
It is a right, but you're not sure that it is a human
a
right.
demandable right.
Torture or not being tortured, is it a human right?
It is, Your Honor.
Are human rights a constitutional right?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, now, the right to bury one's dead, the right of the family to have their relative buried, is this also a right?
Yes, Your
Is
Honor.
it a human right?
Yes, Your Honor.
The right to be buried in a particular place, is that a demandable right? Depends
Well,
on the
I am
law,
not
correct?
aware of a law, Your Honor, that requires a burial.
Yes, and can this right be waived?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. For 27 years, the body of the former president has not been buried. Is that not correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
Why is this so?
Your Honor, I believe they have been...
Because if it were the concern of the relatives that the right to be remembered and the right to move on a little must be recognized, then there can be interim internment. Is that not correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
In fact, that was the agreement in the Memorandum of Understanding. Internment, and of course, there's a difference between both sides of the table now as to whether it was interim or not. Correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes. So therefore, the fact that they held on for 27 years was for a different purpose, correct?
Well, I speculate that it is for the right to be buried at the libingan, Your Honor.
To make a political statement, or in order to assuage the right of a relative to have the relative buried.
That is a possible reason,
So it
Your
can
Honor.
be because they wanted to make a political statement.
That is also a possible
Yes. And
reason,
what
Your
political
Honor.
statement would that have been? Could it have been that he was president for 2 terms?
Yes, Your Honor.
But that is in our hearts. That's part of our history. That we remember Emilio Aguinaldo as the first president of this republic. Is he buried in the libingan ng mga bayani?
No, Your Honor.
Second president, Manuel Quezon. Is he buried in the libingan ng mga bayani?
No, Your Honor.
Jose P. Laurel, president also, third president. Was he interred in the libingan ng mga bayani?
No, Your Honor.
But they're part of history. Is that
Yes,
not
Your
correct?
Honor.
And therefore, there is another purpose to the burial of Marcos in the libingan ng mga bayani. Is that not correct?
We can only speculate, Your Honor.
I'm asking you as counsel, is there another purpose apart from the desire of the family to bury their dead?
I am not aware of the purpose, Your Honor, only that they are allowed by law to bury him.
Okay. As counsel, you acknowledge that there are 20 cases which say that Marcos was a dictator. Do you agree with the jurisprudence?
Yes, Your Honor.
that he was an authoritarian, 18 cases. Do you agree?
Yes, Your Honor, but these
Did
cases, Your
did
Honor,
Ferdinand Marcos cause the violation of human rights?
that has not been established, Your Honor.
Not established
Yes, Your Honor.
by any case in this court?
Your Honor, although
By any
there are judicial pronouncements which may acknowledge that there have been human rights abuses during the Marcos regime, and also that there are legislative pronouncements to the same effect, we submit, Your Honor, that these cases do not establish any guilt or complicity on the part of the late President. Otherwise, those laws would be bills of attainder, and those decisions would have been rendered contrary to due process,
So you
also
are
contrary
challenging
to the
the validity
Constitution.
of Republic Act 10368?
I am not challenging it, Your Honor. I am saying that it is valid, therefore it is not a bill of attainder, and therefore it could not be the basis for the guilt of any person.
Okay, now, Mayor Sara Duterte, the daughter of the president, just apologized on live television for what happened in Davao. Although all of us know that she was not really responsible for it, but her apology was because there was a failure in terms of public safety in that area, she apologized, correct? To the Davaoenos and everyone else in the Philippines. Is that not correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes. President Aquino, Benigno Aquino, went to a ceremony in Corridor on the Jabida massacre and acknowledged the incident. Is that not correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, even the present president already apologized for certain other things. Is that not correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes. Of course, well, this is a sitting president, and his politics is something that we should respect, and certainly to acknowledge that having committed a mistake is something that is the work of a statesman. Is that not correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, for what happened during the entire period of martial law, when President Marcos was president, has there been an acknowledgement from your clients? Because, you know, this case could go away, perhaps. If there is such an acknowledgement, and therefore we do not need to divide the life of President Marcos into president and isolate it from the other aspects of what happened during his regime. Is there an acknowledgement from the heirs of Marcos, just so we know? If there is none, then just tell us that these things happened during martial law.
Your Honor, as far as I know, there is no acknowledgement, but what
There
is to be
acknowledgement.
acknowledged,
So therefore, there will be no apology forthcoming?
Your Honor, I am not aware if there will be an apology forthcoming. All I am aware of is that as far as a court of law should be concerned, the imputations against him have not been established.
Thank you, counsel, for your patience. Can I ask the Solicitor General, please?
Thank you, Your Honor.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning, Solicitor General. Welcome to the court.
Thank you, Your Honor.
16,601,997 votes. That was the vote of President Roa Duterte. Am I accurate?
Yes, Your Honor.
Because that's what I got from your oral presentation. Is that accurate?
It's 16,601,997.
And as
Your
far
Honor.
as we are concerned, it is not under protest, right?
Yes, Your
Yes,
Honor.
it has been proclaimed. Now, there are 42,578,614 votes that were cast during the presidential election. Is that not correct?
I'm not aware of it, Your Honor.
Yes, that was the actual count, counting the votes of Roy Señeres. Is that not correct? Well, that's the actual count. Now, if 42,578,614 votes were cast, and 16,601,997 was for President Roa Duterte, what is the percentage? I have computed.
I'm sorry, Your Honor. I'm
Yes.
not a mathematician.
Yes, I have computed. In fact, I've asked my staff to compute, and there are records that say so. It is 38.99%. Is that not correct?
Yes, because there were other presidential candidates, Your
Yes.
Honor.
So
I think-
16,601,997 is not a majority. Is that not correct?
Well, for purposes of elections, it was not. But this is a
But
snap.
that means that that President Duterte won, right?
Yes, he won by a landslide, Your Honor.
And therefore,
More than 6 million.
at least
from the-
60% of the voters did not agree that President Roa Duterte should be president.
Well, I don't know the statistics, Your Honor, but
Well,
if you say so, I trust you, Your Honor.
Yes, not the statistics, but the implication that those that did not vote for President Duterte, because those that voted, I agree with you, agreed with his policies and his pronouncements, but those that did not vote, therefore, ergo, did not agree with the president, correct?
I cannot fathom the reasons, Your Honor. Maybe they like another candidate, not
Yes.
necessarily
The president.
agree. Yes, Your Honor.
And therefore, they did not want to vote for the president, correct?
For reasons of their own, which I
So
cannot fathom, Your
60%,
Honor.
to be more precise, 60.01% of the voting population, and this is not the entire sovereign because these are only the registered voters, the sovereign is bigger, did not vote for President Roa Duterte. Is that not correct? But I acknowledge that President Roa Duterte is the president, right?
We should take that into proper context, Your Honor.
Please.
Because the second, the runner-up, Your Honor, Mar Rojas, was actually the official candidate of the Liberal Party
I'm
and
sorry.
supported by the then President Benigno Aquino III.
Yes, but
So
we do
maybe
not want to go into
we
the
should
politics of it.
juxtapose that, Your Honor.
Yes,
Duterte
okay.
versus Mar Rojas being the candidate of the Liberal Party.
I'm sorry, please do not forget Roy Señeres. Very important candidate also during the elections. Is that
Yes,
not
Your
correct?
Honor.
Yes, okay.
He's a friend of mine, actually, Your Honor.
Yes. And probably, did you vote for him? No, you no need to answer that question.
Well, I'm not ashamed to state whom I voted for, Your Honor.
I can surmise.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Now, when we bury somebody, it has to be the whole person. Is that not correct?
The remains of the person, Your Honor.
Thank you for correcting me. But it's the entire person viewed from what he is in history, what he is to the relatives, what he is to friends, that we are burying. Is that not correct?
Well, from the point of view of government,
In other
Your
words,
Honor,
can I rephrase it? Which part of President Marcos is president and which part is part of the person that is being accused by the human rights victims?
from
Can we
the
separate it?
yes, Your Honor, from the vantage point of the government, from the vantage point of President Duterte, it is the fact that former President Marcos was a former president and also a military veteran and a soldier.
Yes.
That
But
is the perspective, Your
That
Honor.
is my question. Why is it that government, the administration, in this case the executive, wishes to take only part of the life of Marcos and highlight it and use it as a justification to bury him in the libingan ng mga bayani, but tones down the other portions of this individual? In other words, Mr. Marcos is also named in a law, Republic Act 10368, as having provided at least the atmosphere for 75,000 human rights violations at least. Yet, the administration now wants to not take that into account and only looks at a portion of the person of this individual and use it as a justification for putting him in the libingan ng mga bayani. Can you explain to us that?
Your Honor, as I answered Honorable Kagiwa's question, every matter was taken into consideration, including what you have said, Your Honor.
And part of it is also the law on the human rights victims, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
10368,
Yes.
correct?
But my point here, Your Honor, it is a question of policy and wisdom of President Duterte, Your Honor.
I agree with you that there is still the concept of a political question, but circumscribed by law. Is that not correct?
Of course, Your Honor.
Yes. Would you agree with me that if an act of the executive violates a law, then ipso facto, it is grave abuse of discretion?
Well, that is a hypothetical question, Your Honor. But in this case, Our position is there was no grave abuse
What is
of
your
discretion.
position on the hypothetical? If there is a violation of the law or a provision of the Constitution, is there grave abuse of discretion?
In that hypothetical situation, yes, Your Honor.
Okay. I'll just want to clarify. In your comment, paragraphs 202 to 204, okay, this was also cited by the petitioners. You acknowledge that there was something wrong that happened during martial law. For the record, I hope you will allow me. Can you please read to the records your paragraph 202 to 204 of the consolidated comment, not the supplement?
Yes, Your Honor. Starting with paragraph 202, Your Honor.
Yes, the one on martial law.
To quell any doubts, the interment of the remains of the former President Marcos does not confer upon him the status of the hero. Despite the name Libingan ng mga Bayani, the long history of the said cemetery tells us that its purpose has neither been to confer the people buried therein with the title of hero, nor to require that only those buried therein shall be treated as, quote, heroes, unquote. And 204, Your Honor, the world has read and heard all of these in this information age, the country's history under the hands of former President Marcos is available at one's fingertips. The context of these paragraphs, Your Honor, is that
Thank you for
we are
reading
not
it to the
rewriting
record,
history,
the paragraphs
Your Honor.
in the comment, Solgen. So, the Solicitor General acknowledges, by the way, are you representing the Executive Secretary in this case?
all the public
All the public
respondents, Your Honor.
respondents. What about the PCGG? They're not named as respondents, but your Solgen, are you also representing the PCGG in this case?
We are the statutory council of the...
What about the National Historical Commission?
Well, Your Honor, under our mandate, we represent the Republic of the Philippines.
What about the CHR?
Yes, Your Honor.
And are you presenting your position now as Tribune of the People also?
Well, that is part of my mandate also, Your
Your
Honor.
representation as of this time?
As of this time, I represent the government, especially its head executive, Your Honor, President Duterte, and his subordinate's name in this petition, Your Honor.
Okay, can I just clarify your position because of paragraphs 202 to 204, which you put on record with your consolidated comment, just so I am clear. This administration acknowledges that there was martial law. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor. It's
And that
public
martial
knowledge.
law was declared in September 1972. Is that not correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
And everything that happened in martial law, at least the official acts, such as Planas versus Comelec, Javellana versus Executive Secretary, Amendment number 6, 1976 amendments, 1981 lifting of martial law, 1983 snap election, the proclamation of Marcos as having won by the Batasang Pambansa, and later on the repudiation in EDSA. You accept all of that?
In fact, that is a matter of judicial notice, Your Honor.
Judicial notice. Thank you. So we are free to acknowledge that these things happened. Do you acknowledge that there were human rights violations during martial law?
Yes, Your Honor.
Do you acknowledge that every act that is acknowledged now by the Compensation Commission is in fact something that really happened during martial law? I think this is important to the petitioners.
Well, I believe, Your Honor, the Human Rights Victims Compensation Board are still processing the applications of the human rights victims, Your Honor.
Yes, but your position was there is enough reparation by means of other laws. So I ask you again now. The acts allowed to be compensated by the compensation board created by law, okay, is an acknowledgement of a human rights violation during the regime of Marcos. Will you agree with that?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, so therefore, with that, you are acknowledging as an administration that there is in fact human rights violations if they find it out. Is that not correct?
Which the board is still processing, Your
Okay.
Honor.
do you agree that besides payment of money, it is also as important to be able to acknowledge the violations, to look for other forms of reparation, physical and symbolic?
Yes, Your Honor.
And in fact, that is provided under law.
Yes,
So
Your
that
Honor.
I don't need to go through the law that is already there.
Yes, yes,
And
Your
part of the symbolic recognition is for the acknowledgement that these human rights violations actually happen. Is that not correct?
Well, I cannot disagree with you, Your Honor.
Yes. And this recognition of the violation of human rights is to give honor to somebody that has provided the atmosphere for the commission of these rights. Do you agree with that or not?
Are you referring to former President Marcos, Your Honor?
No, as a theoretical. Because I need to go through a normative process in my mind to be able to judge the facts.
Well, pardon me, Your Honor. My training as a litigation lawyer is that I should not answer to hypothetical questions, Your
But
Honor.
my training also as a litigation lawyer and as a justice is to ask you these questions. Would you prefer to say that you do not wish to answer my question?
Well, may I beg, Your Honor, that it should be couched in a factual perspective, Your
Answer
Honor.
it the way you want to answer it.
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Does the Honorable Justice refer
Will
to...
the burial of Marcos
Yes, Your Honor.
affect the compensation and reparation of the victims of human rights?
Definitely not, Your Honor.
Why?
Well, I heard the testimony of the resource person, and they said it will not affect, Your Honor.
Which resource person?
The chairman of the Human Rights Compensation Board, General Lina Sarmiento, the chairperson, Your Honor.
Will not affect the compensation of the victims?
Yes, Your Honor.
I mean compensation as an effective remedy, not only the financial compensation.
Even the other types of compensation.
May
Your
I ask
Honor.
the chair of the compensation board to affirm whether that is the proper interpretation of her statement?
May I step out of the rostrum, Your Honor?
Chief, can we also ask questions?
Are you through, Justice?
I have a
Ilagan?
few more questions,
Yeah, okay. After your
but
questions...
I will yield to Justice Pepe.
So, because we want to excuse already our resource persons after this, before we break for lunch, so you don't have to come back when we resume. So the justices who want to ask questions from the resource persons can ask their questions now. Thank you.
Just a few preliminary questions to the Solicitor General. Mr. Solicitor General. Is this
Morning, Your
case, is this a case between the heirs of Marcos and the human rights victims?
No, Your Honor. This is a case involving the wisdom and prerogative of the sitting president to allow the interment of the remains of Marcos at the Libingan, Your Honor.
More concretely, how did this case come about?
Well, this case came about when initially 6, and then there were 2 other petitions that were filed in court, Your Honor.
What was the basis of the petition? The case did not come about because of the election promise
Yes,
of the elected president.
right, Your Honor.
And I read the basic document which is attached to the petition. That is the order or the implementation of the election promise to bury the remains of FM. And the petitioners came to this court to say that such promise cannot be performed because it's against the Constitution. Is that not the situation?
Perfectly right, Your Honor.
And as I heard from the arguments that were proffered during the past day and today, that there is a violation of the Constitution because of our obligation in our treaties on international human rights, etc., and the provisions, so many provisions of the Constitution, all embodied in the Declaration of Policy in RA 10368. And these are descriptive words by virtue of the article, etc., enact domestic legislation to give effect to the rights recognized therein, etc., etc. All these arguments, which is anchored on the, well, arguably relevant provisions of the Constitution. My question is to you and to the petitioners and to the resource persons. In Section 26 of this law, it says, role of victims. Persons who are HRVVs, regardless of whether they opt to seek reparation or not, shall be given recognition by enshrining their names in a roll of human rights victims to be prepared by the board. A memorial museum library shall be established in honor and in memory of the victims of human rights violations, whose name shall be inscribed in the roll. A compendium of their sacrifices shall be prepared and may be readily viewed and accessed in the internet. The memorial, museum, library, compendium shall have an appropriation of at least 500 million pesos from the accrued interest of 10 billion. The roll may also be displayed in government agencies as may be designated by HRVV Memorial Commission as created hereunder. Does this not already contain the statutory recognition of the sacrifices of the human rights victims? Can we read into this declaration about what non-monetary benefits the victims are entitled to, their right to question or to exclude Marcos, the remains of Marcos, from burial in the libingan ng mga bayani?
Well, I agree, Your Honor. The state has done its part by enacting these laws.
That's right. May I ask for a reaction from the resource persons? Because as I see it, correct me if I'm wrong, that all these issues that are being brought, that has been brought before us, are questions that ought to have been brought either from the two commissions, the Commission on Human Rights and the Commission on the Reparations, etc.
Yes,
Because
Your Honor.
these are non-monetary benefits, and the non-monetary benefits is already prescribed in the law. Should not all these arguments be brought before the commissions whose chairpersons are now our resource person?
Yes, Your Honor. In
The
fact,
issue of re-traumatization. Can
Yes.
the Supreme Court rule that burying Marcos in the libingan ng mga bayani would be a re-traumatization?
no, Your Honor.
Those questions, I think, beg to be answered so that we can decide this case in accordance with the sentiments of the public, etc., what the law states, and all the other considerations that have been brought during the oral arguments. As I said, the petitioners and the resource person may react. Any one of the chairmen? Yes, actually on your remark concerning re-traumatization, my question is that your personal opinion or is that the opinion of the Commission? And if so, if it is the opinion of the Commission, has there been a deliberation or whatever, a meeting on that issue on the re-traumatization of the human rights victims?
May it please the Court, Your Honors, good morning. To answer your question directly, Your Honors, yes, the Commission on Human Rights has discussed this issue, particularly since it was invited to be a resource person herein. And we have in fact submitted, as instructed by the Supreme Court, a legal memorandum last Friday. And this legal memorandum was considered by the Commission and Bank. And this legal memorandum does make reference to the principle under international human rights law that there is a positive duty on the part of a state that acknowledges violations of human rights to prevent any action that will result in re-traumatization. These are in fact found in Principle 10 of the UN Guiding Principles Your Honors.
Yes, and that has been encapsulated in the declaration of policy in the law itself.
Yes, Your Honor. There is, of course, Section 2, Declaration of Policy of Republic Act 10368, Your Honors. And the Declaration of Policy clearly states, Your Honors, in the second paragraph, acknowledgement of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, as well as acknowledgement of the right to an effective remedy as being peremptory in character, jus cogens, and in fact non-derogable, Your Honors.
And should not we read those declaration of policy in relation to the provision on monetary benefits, non-monetary benefits, and the section on the role of the Section 26 of the law, which I just read?
Yes, Your Honor. It is clear both in international human rights law on the definition of reparations, as well as in Republic Act 10368, that reparations as an obligation of the state
Yes.
has several components, one of which is the granting of monetary reparations. That is why a 10 billion fund has been set aside.
I agree. My point is, having provided for a role of heroes, a role of victims, and having this enshrined in a memorial, internet, and everything, can there be some other non-monetary benefits which will include the exclusion of Marcos from being buried in the libingan ng mga bayani?
Yes, Your Honors, because aside from the monetary benefits, there are non-monetary reparations and symbolic reparations, which are all provided in the law, Your Honors.
Yes.
The monetary benefits are a matter which the board is currently applying and will be awarding. The other non-monetary benefits are actually spread across different agencies. They will determine the role of
Yes.
victims, but there
Yes,
is
sir.
a separate body, Your Honors, provided in the law called the Memorial Commission.
That's right.
And the Memorial Commission will undertake other forms
I agree.
of reparations.
I agree. I am saying, does not this embody everything that the victims can ask for as recognition, as reparation?
Yes, Your Honor, which is why it is fundamental to the full implementation and execution of Republic Act 10368 to prevent the burial of that who has been legally and judicially determined to be the perpetrator of human rights violations to be designated as a hero. Because how can you have in one sense both heroes among the victims of martial law and declaring as well the perpetrator as a hero by burying him in the libingan ng bayani? It is inconsistent, Your Honor.
Has it not been said that the Solicitor General is even willing and submitted, in fact, that after the court has said, or will say, after the court says that, yes, bury him without anything more, without any statement on whether Marcos is a hero, heel, evil, or whatever, then that's enough.
Your
If he
Honor,
is buried, and that is the pronouncement of the court, will the memorial, will Section 26, the provisions of Section 26 of this law be negated?
yes, Your Honor. We do not deny that Mr. Marcos has the right to be buried. But the right to be buried in the libingan ng bayani with all that it implies that he is in a hero, despite the denials of the Office of the Solicitor General, would, and as we mentioned this in our legal memorandum, Your Honor, would in effect be in contravention of the spirit and intent of this
Okay,
law
Mr. Counsel,
in perpetuity, Your Honor.
Excuse me, if the court says he is not a hero, but because of the provisions of this AFP, etc., he can be buried in the libingan, will that be objectionable? Will that affect the rights of the human rights victims? When the Supreme Court itself will say, let us assume that there is a majority who will say he is not a hero. He is not what is supposed to embody heroism, etc. But because he is a president who is mentioned in that proclamation as being allowed to be buried, then he can be buried. By the way, And parenthetically, I think that the counsel for the Marcoses was right when she said that the Marcoses did not demand that he be buried. The president just made this an election promise, and then he said, "I'm implementing my promise." It's just allowing the burial of Marcos. It's not because the heirs demanded it.
Your Honors, ultimately, every citizen of this republic will, of course, defer to the wise and considered judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court. However, that is why we are appearing here as resource persons. It is to clarify that it is our considered opinion that burying him would be contrary to international and national law with respect to human rights, particularly, Your Honors, because of the fact that there is, in fact, no acknowledgement on the part of the perpetrator that they had, in fact, committed these human rights violations. The fact that there is no acknowledgement and pursuing a burial in the libingan ng bayani runs contrary to the letter and intent of this law, Your Honors.
So long as the apology is not forthcoming, then he should not be buried. I mean, the remains of Marcos should not be buried in the libingan because that would be contrary to the rights of the human rights victim.
Your Honors, not just an apology from the perpetrator, but also a public acknowledgement from the state is obligated under the rules of reparation. The fact that the law was passed is one such public acknowledgement. But the fact of burial in the libingan ng bayani would be a contrary act to that public
And the
acknowledgement.
state is President Duterte right now.
Your Honors, the executive department is headed by the President, Your
Yes,
Honors.
yes. President Duterte can say, I am withdrawing my directive. I am not fulfilling my promise anymore because my promise was an unconstitutional promise. After saying that, then there's no case anymore.
Your Honors, until the court makes its ruling, of course, the President is in a position to make his decisions regarding this matter. And if after a learned consideration that there is in fact a law that is going to be contravened, he would withdraw his initial decision, that might be a resolution, Your Honor.
And the resolution, of course, will rest on whether or not there was, in fact, grave abuse of discretion as defined over and over again.
Your Honor, if any public official performs an act contrary to law and the Constitution, then we believe and concede that the Supreme Court is in a position to determine if in fact there is a grave abuse of discretion in this case.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honors.
Justice De Castro will now ask questions.
Is Rear Admiral Ernesto Enriquez around? Or anyone from the Philippine Veterans Affairs Office? Is anyone here who can answer my questions? Will you please come forward?
Please identify yourself and your office.
I am retired Brigadier General Restituto Aguilar, Your Honor. I am
What
the
office?
acting chief of the Veterans Memorial and Historical Division.
This morning I was given a copy of, I think this is a presentation to be done by Mr. Ocampo Enriquez. In any case, I do not have a clear copy of the regulations, AFP regulations pertaining to the libingan ng bayani. But I only have some summary here. It would seem that among those who are qualified to be interred in the libingan ng mga bayani, the first one mentioned, even ahead of the President or Commander-in-Chief, the Secretaries of National Defense, the Chief of Staff, the General Flag Officers of the AFP, are the Medal of Valor awardees. It would seem that first and foremost, the Medal of Valor awardees are entitled to be interned in the libingan ng mga bayani. May I know if you have any regulation on how a person who was awarded a Medal of Valor for his heroic act, for risking his life during the war, is stripped of his medal. Do you have any regulation on that? Stripping the Medal of Valor from one who legitimately earned it during the war?
We have not encountered any, Your Honor. Not in recent memory, Your Honor.
And this Medal of Valor carries with it the privilege of being interned in the libingan ng mga bayani.
Yes, Your Honor.
So, so in the absence of this regulation, wherein one who has earned a Medal of Valor is stripped of his medal, can we say now that Marcos, who had earned this Medal of Valor for his heroic act during the war, cannot be stripped of this medal at this time, even if he was removed as President of the Philippines?
Your Honor, this is something that is legal in nature, and I have no authority interpreting it. May I request the state lawyers to answer for me, Your Honor.
So, but it's enough for the moment to say that there is no regulation or no case at all before where one who has earned a Medal of Valor is stripped of this medal.
Not in our history, Your Honor.
So the question now before the court is his removal, the removal of former President Marcos in a People's Power Revolution should nullify this Medal of Valor. That is now the question before the court now, because if he has a Medal of Valor, he is entitled to be interned in the libingan ng mga bayani. Or should his removal as as president be considered to be a good reason to strip him bare of everything that he has done during his lifetime? That is now the question before the court. So,
I am not a lawyer, Your
yes,
Honor.
I
That's
know.
why.
I'm not expecting any answer from you right now, but it's just, yes, the Solicitor General would like to answer that.
If Your Honor, please. Military records show that former President Ferdinand Marcos was awarded a Medal of Valor by virtue of General Order Number 167, dated October 16, 1958. And may I read, Your Honor, for the record. The Medal of Valor is hereby awarded to Major Ferdinand Marcos, 0-41594 Infantry, for extraordinary gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty in a suicidal action against overwhelming enemy forces at the junction of Salian River and Abu Abu River, Bataan, on or about 22 January 1942. And may I read the Presidential Decree 1687, dated March 24, 1980. It says here, Your Honor, whereas the Medal of Valor is the highest award that may be given a Filipino soldier in recognition of conspicuous acts of gallantry above and beyond the call of duty and in total disregard of personal safety. Whereas an awardee of the Medal of Valor for his supreme self-sacrifice and distinctive act of gallantry performed more than ordinarily hazardous service and deserves due recognition from a grateful government and people. It is the position of the state, Your Honor, that once this medal is awarded, it cannot be diminished, it cannot be nullified, Your Honor, because it is already a done, it is a fait accompli already, Your Honor.
I have no further question.
Thank you.
May I request the Solicitor General to provide the court clear copies of all the AFP regulation? Because it would seem that there are different categories of persons entitled to be interned in the libingan ng bayani. And there are different rules applicable to each category. But we can't see that in the summary. You don't have to do it now. Do you have all the... There is a series of regulation.
Yes, Your Honor. And may I add, Your Honor, if I'll be allowed, Your Honor. Aside from the Medal of Valor award, there is also General Orders number 22, Award of Purple Heart Medal. And there are names included here, Your Honor. This is by virtue of the authority vested in the commanding officer, USAFIP, Area Command, United States Armed Forces, Western Pacific, APO 707, under the provisions of Army Regulation 600-45 as amended, a Purple Heart Medal is awarded by the commanding officer, USFIP Area Command, to each of the following named officers and enlisted men. USAFIP North Luzon. There are names belonging to the 14th Infantry, Bravo Company, Charlie Company, Delta Company, Service Company, Infantry, and other units, Your Honor. And I'll go direct to the point. Fourteenth Infantry, Major Ferdinand Marcos E. This is by order of Colonel Volkman, Rafael Pargas, Lieutenant Colonel, GSC Chief of Staff, attested official by Sofronio Z. Concepcion, Major AGS, Philippine Army, Adjutant General. We have here an authenticated copy, Your Honor. And I ask the PVAW, Your Honor, and I was informed that the one who executed this order and made it an official issuance was by virtue of the order of not only Colonel Volkman but also Rafael Pargas, Your Honor, who I understand is the father of Eta Rosales, Your Honor. Thank you.
Justice Velasco will ask questions from Secretary Alunan.
We request Secretary Alunan to go to the podium.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Mr. Secretary, did you bring a copy of the Memorandum of Understanding between the government and the widow, or now Congresswoman, I think, Imelda P. Marcos, with you? Do you have the copy with you?
Yes, Your Honor, I have a copy.
Can you please read paragraph 4 of the Memorandum of Understanding?
Yes, Your Honor. Paragraph 4 reads as follows. That the remains shall be buried on the 9th of September 1992 at the family burial grounds at Batac, Ilocos Norte, provided that any transfer of burial grounds shall be with prior clearance from the Philippine government, taking into account the prevailing socio-political climate.
The prevailing
socio-political climate.
Socio-political climate. Okay, on top of the phrase buried on the 9th of September appears the words are apparently written by Congresswoman Imelda P. Marcos, and you stated that in the previous oral argument, the phrase, she placed there the phrase temporarily interred.
That's correct, Your Honor.
That's correct. Okay. As signatory for the government, you were authorized by the then President Fidel B. Ramos to enter into this agreement?
Yes, Your Honor.
And as the representative of the government, you of course understand that anything that you sign here binds the government.
Yes,
Is
Your
that
Honor.
correct?
That's correct.
And what does the phrase temporarily interred, placed on top of the phrase buried on the 9th of September and signed or initialed by the First Lady mean? What is the legal effect of that?
The legal effect of that, Your Honor, is that she changed the tenor of our agreement. We agreed that the late President Marcos would be buried in Ilocos Norte, but after we both signed it, she, on her own, placed temporarily interred, and you will note that she countersigned it. You will also note that I did not countersign it because I did not see this.
When did she put that phrase temporarily interred on page 1 of the Memorandum of Understanding? Are you saying it was after
Yes.
the two of you signed this Memorandum of Understanding?
Yes, Your Honor. Actually, we did not sign it together. I signed it first. I sent it to her. She signed it. And then subsequently, she wrote temporarily entered.
Okay. In what place did you have this agreement executed and signed? What was the venue of the signing or the negotiation and signing, eventual signing of this Memorandum of Understanding? Where was this executed?
Your Honor, I negotiated with her in her temporary residence in India Street, South Forbes, for about a
Okay.
month. And subsequently, we arrived at an understanding, which is contained here. I probably, if my memory still is correct, I must have signed this in my office at the DILG, and then subsequently the copy was sent to her, where she signed it in her house, in her residence.
This agreement is not notarized. It was not notarized, and this was not witnessed by any witness at all. That's why there are no witnesses reflected here. So, what is this kind of document now?
Your Honor,
You're saying you only agreed to the burial at the burial grounds at Batac, Ilocos Norte, and on her part, she said the remains of the former president will just be temporarily interred at the burial grounds at Batac, Ilocos Norte. So, what was the agreement reached, Mr. Secretary?
the agreement reached, Your Honor, is this document where both our signatures appear, except that subsequently she placed, without my knowledge, the term or the words temporarily entered.
But based on your statement, you did not agree to that. Your position is that this agreement refers to actual burial at the burial grounds of Batac, Ilocos Norte, and it is to be the permanent burial grounds. Is that the intent on the part of the government when you signed this agreement?
That's correct, Your Honor. And we signed this on the 19th of August. Now, subsequently, a second memorandum of understanding was sent by Mrs. Marcos to, I suppose, the President, directly to the President, because the second memorandum of understanding, which was most likely sent the following day, August 20, it was received by the Office of the President on August 20, has the same wordings except that they now perfected, from their point of view, paragraph 4, where interim burial was now typewritten in place of buried. And this memorandum of understanding was signed by her, but it wasn't signed by me.
I don't have a copy of the memorandum of agreement allegedly signed on the 20th of August 1992. Now, which is the official agreement now? Is this the memorandum of agreement dated August 19, 1992, or the one you referred to, which now bears the date August 20, 1992, and which was transmitted to the office of the President? What is now the real agreement? What is the official agreement now?
The official agreement is what I personally, I officially submitted to the President of the Philippines on August 19, which was altered by Imelda Marcos. The following day, she sent her version of the memorandum of agreement that she signed without my signature, but which was disregarded by the President. In fact, if I may share, the comment of the President when he saw the words temporarily entered was that this was a sign of bad faith.
But then again, Mr. Secretary, this was not notarized, so...
No, it was not, Your Honor.
It will be your view, your position on the effects of this memorandum of understanding against her understanding that the burial will only be a temporary arrangement at Batac, Ilocos Norte. So that's the situation now with regard to this agreement, okay? You're saying this is the actual agreement. But this was not signed at the same time because you signed it at your office and the Congresswoman and rather the widow of the late President signed it in her residence at Forbes. Okay? Now, I refer you to the second part of paragraph 5. It says, provided that any transfer of the burial ground shall be with prior clearance from the Philippine government, taking into account the prevailing socio-political climate. There is no dispute on that. This is really the agreement on that.
Correct. That's correct, Your Honor.
So you're saying that there can be a transfer of the burial grounds of the President. So in effect, based on your understanding of this agreement, even if the remains of the former president were interred or buried at Batac, Ilocos Norte, it actually is not a permanent burial because that very stipulation there says that it can be transferred to another burial ground provided there is clearance from the Philippine government. Correct?
That's correct, sir, except that,
yes,
except that he wasn't buried.
What are you saying?
He was not buried in Batac. He was interred, but he was not buried.
He was not buried. And where are the remains now?
Well, it's not buried. It's above ground.
So that's not burial. Anyway. So, if there is an agreement that it can be transferred, then can you say that the clearance or the authority given by President Duterte to have the remains of the President transferred to Libingan ng Bayani is in accordance with this memorandum of agreement you signed with the Congresswoman, the widow of the late President?
I think the current president has the prerogative to determine what the current conditions are.
Okay. That's all, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Justice Bernabe. Only to the source persons because we will have our lunch break now. Yeah.
May I request the Solicitor General to submit a copy of the Medal of Valor Award, which is not part of the records right now.
Will it include the Purple Heart Medal, Your Honor? Would you be interested to get it?
At the end of, when we are done with the oral argument, not today.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Secretary, can you provide the court a copy of that second agreement which you said was dated August 20, 1992, and also a copy of the agreement which you signed on the 19th of August 1992 also? Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Chief, are we expecting the resource speakers?
Yeah, the resource persons will be excused from attending the afternoon session.
May I ask one question only from the National Historical Commission?
Yes, okay, go ahead.
Good morning, Chair Jokno.
Good morning, Your Honor.
There was manifestation made by the Solicitor General regarding the Medal of Valor and the Purple Heart of former President Marcos.
Yes, Your Honor.
Was this part of your study that you submitted to the court?
Yes, Your Honor.
Can you give us a gist of what your study pointed out?
Basically, Your Honor, what we wanted to do, we approached the study from a historical point of view. And one of the tools that we use in the examination of evidence, because we have our own rules of evidence in the practice of history, we wanted to corroborate claims that were made by Mr. Marcos in his biographies and in other documents he had signed. And corroboration we define as the careful, meticulous practice of checking historical details against each other. So what we were looking for was a pattern or consistency in the documentation. And we looked not just at the matter of the medals, we also looked at the rank, and we also looked at the guerrilla unit. And we have a number of documents, including some of those that were presented by the Solicitor General in his annexes, that appear to us to be rather questionable.
Just on the Medal of Valor for the suicidal attack of former President Marcos at that particular juncture, and also the, maybe just on that alone, what were the findings of the Historical Commission?
For the record, Your Honors, we examined the medals given by the United States. We did not dispute the claims of medals given by the armed forces of the Philippines. And if you look at the dates when these medals were given, they were given from sometime in the 50s onwards. I think the last one being given when Mr. Marcos was president himself. So we looked at the the medals that were claimed to have been received from the United States, the Distinguished Service Cross, which the one biography claims was pinned on Mr. Marcos by General Douglas MacArthur himself while in a foxhole. We looked at the Silver Star, and we also looked at the Order of the Purple Heart, the American one. No? Now, what we found were several telegrams that were contained in the National Security Archive pointing to two telegrams written in 1966. The claims are that the Distinguished Service Cross and the Silver Star were received in 1946. 20 years later, there are two telegrams, one of them from the State Department of Washington, stating that Mr. Marcos never received those medals. And repeat, the telegram says, repeat, did not receive the medals. The telegram was issued in connection with Mr. Marcos's state visit in 1966 and a request from U.S. Ambassador Blair, ambassador to the Philippines, asking the State Department if they could give these medals to Mr. Marcos because he had never received them. And the State Department replied, yes, he never received them. And
Just on the Medal of Valor? From
we did not look at the Medal of Honor, Your Honor.
There is no part of your study looked at the Medal of Valor
No.
mentioned by the soldier?
We looked at the American medals.
Thank you, Madam
Thank you,
Chair.
Your Honor.
Chairperson Jokno, can you please go back? I have a question. In the citation for the Medal of Honor awarded by the Philippines to former President Marcos, one of the premises is that he was recommended by General Mateo Capinpin for the U.S. Congressional Medal of Honor in 1942, April of 1942. Since you studied look into the medals that the U.S. Was supposed to have
given.
awarded to President Marcos, did you find anything regarding this supposed recommendation by General Capinpin that Marcos be awarded the U.S. Congressional Medal of Honor?
We did not find any information about the U.S. Congressional Medal of Honor.
Not
Your
even
Honor.
this alleged recommendation?
No, but if the
Can you take
armed
a look
forces-
again? Because there is an allegation in the citation,
Yes,
Philippine citation, when it awarded
we can check.
the Medal of Honor to President
May
Marcos.
we-
One of the premises is that
There
he
was
was
a
recommended
recommendation.
for the U.S. Congressional Medal of Honor based on the recommendation of General Capinpin.
We will look into it, Your Honor. May I request access to the Armed Forces archives so we can look as well?
No, this is supposed to be
Have
in
been
the
sent.
U.S.
But I'm sure there must be a document from
Yeah, okay,
here, the point of origin.
Yeah.
We could look at that too. Is that all right?
Yes, can you give access to the NHCP for look into this?
Good morning, Your Honors. Yes, we will comply with all the requirements of the Ms. Jokno.
Thank you. Your excuse. So we will resume at 2 o'clock this afternoon. The resource persons are excused from attending, except for the acting chief of the PVAO, because Justice Velasco has some more questions for you. So we shall now take our break. We resume at 2 p.m.